Good morning and welcome to this virtual press conference to announce the kickoff of the Let RI Vote campaign. My name is John Marion. I'm Executive Director of Common Cause Rhode Island. Thank you for joining us this morning. I am representing organizations in the Voting Access Coalition. It is a coalition of nonprofit organizations that have been gathering and growing since the beginning of the pandemic to assure that all eligible Rhode Islanders are able to exercise their right to vote. In 2020, the Voting Access Coalition led efforts to advocate for temporary changes to accommodate voters during the pandemic and engaged in a robust public education campaign to make sure voters had the information they needed to safely cast their ballots during an unprecedented year. The results were 4 successful statewide elections in the last 10 months. Today, we are proud to announce the next phase of our work, the launch of the Let RI Vote campaign. Our goal is to build on the successes of 2020 by codifying the best aspects of the recent changes and pushing forward to advance the cause of voting rights in Rhode Island with bold reforms. Let RI Vote will support 2 pieces of legislation. The first, H6003 and S516, is an omnibus bill we call the Let RI Vote Act. It will provide voters 3 equally accessible ways to cast their ballot: by using a mail ballot, by voting early in person, and on Election Day. The second piece of legislation, Senate number S569, will put a constitutional amendment on the ballot in 2022 to change the Rhode Island Constitution and allow same-day registration. Same-day registration is the game changer when it comes to increasing voter turnout. 21 states, including half of the states in New England, have adopted this reform, and on average, it has increased turnout by 5%. Expanding the franchise in Rhode Island has been a centuries-long process, from the Dorr Rebellion to 2006's historic vote to automatically restore voting rights to the formerly incarcerated. It's time for us to take the next big step in that progression. First, we'll hear from our Secretary of State, Nellie M. Gorbea.
Good morning. I'm your Secretary of State, Nellie Gorbea. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person this morning, but I really didn't want to miss being a part of it. I am so proud to be part of this coalition and to express my support for the Let Rhode Island Vote Act. This legislation will continue the progress we have made over the past 6 years, improving access to the ballot box while securing the integrity of every vote. Our work in defending democracy is so important at a time when we see states working to restrict voting options for their citizens. Rhode Island needs to continue to be a leader in voting access, and this legislation keeps us moving forward. It's hard to believe, but over the past year, we have held 4 statewide elections. The changes made in response to the pandemic safety measures resulted in more Rhode Islanders voting in advance of Election Day, either by mail or early in person. In the November general election, we saw more voters cast ballots than any election in our state's history. As your Secretary of State, I was thrilled to see the record turnout. However, I was just as excited to see that voters cast ballots by mail, early in person, or at a polling place on Election Day in nearly equal numbers. This shows what I hear at the grocery store every time I go out, that Rhode Islanders want options to vote in ways that they are most comfortable with. It also highlights the importance of providing access to voting, no matter the voter's preference. The Let Rhode Island Vote Act does just that. Expanding early in-person voting and mail ballot drop boxes, permanently removing the witness and notary requirement, and making permanent mail ballot lists will all expand voting access for our state's voters. Providing voters with the opportunity to remove the 30-day voter registration deadline from the state constitution will allow more voters the opportunity to cast ballots on Election Day. I'm so proud to be part of this coalition and thank Senators Oyer and my state Senator Alana DiMario and Representative Kazarian for sponsoring this important legislation. I want to thank John Marion for once again marshaling the Voting Access Coalition to make sure that citizens from all walks of life are engaged in this important effort. Together, we can ensure that Rhode Islanders continue to have safe and secure voting options that enable their voices to be heard in the 21st century. Thank you again for the opportunity to join you virtually this morning, and I look forward to working with you to get this important legislation signed into law.
The Let RI Vote Act will expand access to mail ballots and early voting. It will expand access to mail ballots by eliminating all excuses for requesting a mail ballot, allowing voters to request a mail ballot online, expanding the permanent mail ballot list, eliminating the requirement that mail ballots contain the signature of 2 witnesses or notary public, expanding the number of secure mail ballot drop boxes available to voters, allowing voters with disabilities to request a mail ballot 21 days prior to the election instead of the current 45 days. It will also expand access to early voting in Rhode Island by creating a new system of early voting that does not rely on the emergency mail ballot process and ends the confusion for voters. Requires that early voting be available during the weekend before Election Day. While the Let RI Vote Act contains many benefits for voters, it also improves administrations of our elections by putting in place new processes for voter roll list maintenance, putting new safeguards in for automated comparison of signatures for mail ballots, moving the voter's signature to the inside of the mail ballot envelope to reduce the number of envelopes needed while protecting voter privacy. And finally, moving the primary election starting in 2024 to give election administrators more time to get ballots out to military and overseas voters for the general election. As part of this campaign, we've built a dedicated website at letrivote.org. You can find more information about the legislation at the website. And we are asking those who support the campaign to go to the website today and sign a petition asking the General Assembly to enact these reforms. We are also asking supporters to follow the Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram accounts at Let RI Vote. I want to introduce the sponsors of the 2 pieces of legislation that are part of the Let RI Vote campaign. And start with Representative Kazarian. Representative Kazarian is the House sponsor of both the Let RI Vote Act and the same-day registration resolution. She represents House District 63. She was first elected in 2012. Representative Kazarian, welcome.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me here today. I am very excited to be sponsoring these 2 pieces of legislation in the House, the 2 bills that are part of the Let Rhode Island Vote package. These bills are all about encouraging people who are eligible to vote, to partake in that most sacred process for all of us as Americans, which is picking and choosing our leaders for our country, our state, and our city. Something I really found encouraging during this last election cycle was how many people were able to get out and vote. So many people were concerned at the beginning of the pandemic about a year ago. Can't believe it's been a year. So many people were concerned about how they were going to vote during this election. And we were able to make adjustments so that it was easier for them to access mail ballots, easier for them to do in-person early voting. Everybody seemed kind of nervous about all these changes, but as we saw it play out during the election cycle, I heard from so many constituents who were so encouraged by these new processes. They felt it was very easy for them to exercise their right to vote. And there were a lot of different ways that they were able to do that. We saw the process really work in this past election. And I think it is part of our job as the legislature to ensure that everybody does have that right to partake in picking and choosing who represents them in their government. Feeling so encouraged by everybody, all the constituents that thought the process was great. I was really excited to work on these 2 bills to try and keep some of these changes that we made permanent. I myself voted early in person and just thought the process couldn't have been better. There were no long lines. It was really quick. I could pick the day that I wanted to go in and vote. And it took, I think it took about 4 minutes. So really, really great process. The second bill that I also sponsored, the same-day registration, is a bill I also feel quite passionately about because I work in tech. I work with a lot of young people who have lived and chose to work and live in Rhode Island. And many of them were really excited an election was coming up, but had kind of been dragging their feet about registering in Rhode Island. So I think this is a great process. A lot of them wanted to partake, wanted to exercise their rights to vote, and couldn't because even though they'd been following politics, they just forgot to register, and it kind of kept them out of the system. So I think this is really crucial, again, to encouraging all of those people who live and work in our state to partaking in our democratic process.
Thank you. Thank you for your leadership on this. Next, we have Senator Dawn Oyer, who's with us. She is the Senate sponsor of the Let RI Vote Act. She's represented District 13, including parts of Newport and Jamestown in the Senate since 2017. Welcome, Senator Oyer.
Thank you. And thank you to the Rhode Island Voting Access Coalition and Let RI Vote campaign for holding this event and for working with us on sponsoring this important legislation. Thank you also to Whip Kazarian. I always enjoy working on bills with Katie because I always know that they're going to be really good bills. You know, elections, I'm very passionate about elections. Prior to becoming elected myself, this is an area that I addressed in my private law practice as well. So I'm very passionate about this. And, you know, really, it is about having fair and free elections. I mean, it's such a foundational pillar of our democracy. And fair and free elections only happens when everybody has the access to vote and has the access to vote freely. And so, you know, these bills are really building upon what we learned in the COVID-19 crisis, and to make sure that we're, you know, fixing some of the barriers there that are quite frankly in law right now to make sure that it's easier for folks to vote. You know, the early voting provisions that went into effect this year, as Whip Kazarian mentioned, are just so important to make sure that, you know, people can access the polls. You know, there's been discussion in Rhode Island over the years about poll closing times and things like that. But really, you know, people don't work a 9-to-5 schedule anymore. And so having access to vote at a time when it's convenient in the work-life schedule is how we're going to encourage more people to get out and vote. I think more people voting makes us have a stronger democracy. So I couldn't be more thrilled to work on this legislation with the coalition. And a special thanks to John Marion, because he has been just a passionate advocate for all of these issues for years. And so, you know, we wouldn't be as far as we are in this conversation in Rhode Island without his advocacy. And I also want to acknowledge my Senate colleague, Chair Sue Sosnowski, who's also put in legislation around voting. We'll be working together to try to come out with the best possible package that helps support Rhode Island voters.
Thank you, Senator Oyer. We wanted to hear from voters who have benefited from changes that were made in 2020 and will benefit if this legislation is enacted. So we invited 3 voters to join us today, and I'm going to start with Miranda Oakley. Miranda is a motivational speaker and activist for people with disabilities from South Kingstown, Rhode Island. In 2020, Miranda was one of the individual plaintiffs in the successful lawsuit filed by the ACLU of Rhode Island, challenging the requirement that mail ballots be accompanied by the signature of 2 witnesses or notary public. She graduated from URI in 2016 with a BA in English.
Thank you. Imagine it's election day. You cannot drive yourself to your polling or drop box location, or take yourself to meet with a notary or the 2 people you need to be your witnesses in order to vote. The notary and 2 witnesses cannot come meet you because of hectic work schedules. Without these 2 witnesses and a notary, you cannot vote. This could become reality for me as a totally blind woman, unless the 2 witness and notary requirement is removed. In my town, there is no accessible transportation like the RIDE program because I don't live on a bus route and Ubers are unreliable where I live. Removing the notary and 2 witness requirement would mean myself and other voters in Rhode Island with disabilities would be able to vote without worrying about missing out on their constitutional right because they couldn't get witnesses or find a notary. Because of COVID-19, mailing in my ballot has worked well for me. Because of personal preference, I have not used a Braille ballot. Mailing in my ballot allows me to exercise my constitutional right to vote without putting myself or my household at risk. I believe people should have the freedom to cast their vote in whatever method works best for them. It's my belief that voters should be able to mail in their ballot, even without a pandemic, if they choose to do so. Mailing in my ballot means I can cast my vote without worrying about how I'm going to get to my polling or Dropbox location. Mail-in ballots are also great for those of us struggling with transportation. Our voting rights shouldn't be taken away from us because of unnecessary barriers holding us back. Every vote matters, including voters with disabilities.
Thank you, Miranda. That's very powerful. Next, we're going to hear from Terry Kubricki. She's a retired telecommunication worker who previously worked at South County Hospital. She grew up in Johnston and now lives in Narragansett, Rhode Island.
Okay. My name is Tracy Kubricki, and in 2020, I voted by mail. Voting in 2020 was very convenient. It would be extremely helpful to make this permanent for many reasons. I'm often on the road. It is foreseeable that I would not know until the night before the election that I would not be in town and unable to vote. If I'm able to vote by mail, I would not have to try to rearrange my schedule to get back to Narragansett before the polls close. If mail ballot drop boxes are made permanent, the ballots can be dropped off anytime without getting out of the car. This is very helpful with a baby or small child, since they wouldn't need to be unbuckled, carried into the building, brought back to the car, and rebuckled, especially if they're sleeping. I also feel we should be able to sign up for a mail-in ballot online. When signing up online, voters should be able to join a permanent mail ballot so that voters don't have to request a ballot each election. Another item that was very helpful this year was doing away with the requirement for 2 witnesses or having the ballot notarized. This is an unnecessary step. It can be very inconvenient to try to get 2 people to sign the ballot or to go to a bank or library to get the ballot notarized. Please keep the improvements made to voting in 2020.
Thank you, Tracy. So our final speaker is David Sherman. He is a union member with the United Auto Workers Region 9A Local 2121 at Foxwoods Casino. David lives in Scituate, Rhode Island, and works as a dealer with Foxwoods in Connecticut. He is also a health and safety rep for the International. David is here today to speak about the need for expanding early voting in particular. David.
There are many workers who do not fit in the mold of being able to work 9 to 5. It makes it harder for these workers to get to the polls. I'm a member of UAW, Local 2121, and work as a dealer at Foxwoods in Connecticut. I am also a health and safety representative for my local. Between my work shift and involvement with the union, I'm working 11 or 12 hours a day. It's extremely hard for me to get to the polls on election day and to vote. Any employee who works 10, 12 hours a day has the same problem. The polls are only open until 8 p.m. For me, that's an impossibility for me to make it to commute and get to the polls. With early voting in place this past November, I was able to work around my work schedule and vote that day. I have voted in every election my entire life. It's extremely important for me to cast my vote and have my voice heard, but it's getting harder and harder each year due to my work schedule. With early voting, there was less stress for me to get to the polls and very easy for me to be able to figure it out. A lot of people you're not aware of basically have to take a vacation day or miss work. And the gentlemen and ladies that have to work 2 jobs to put food on the table, it's almost impossible for them to get to the polls. Because what are they going to give up? Food on the table, rent, gas money? My wife works in a group home. With the opportunity to vote by mail, it was much easier and safer for her clients to request a mail ballot and cast her vote by mail. We are all here in support of these bills to expand the voting rights. Is it not responsibility of all of us to make it possible for more citizens to take part in democracy? Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. So Same-day registration has been around for many, many decades in a large number of states. Currently, there are 21 states that have same-day registration, including 50% of the states in New England, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Maine. Without widespread fraud, technology actually will enable us to do even more that would be preventative. So Rhode Island, starting in 2016, adopted what are referred to as electronic poll books. So when you go to vote on election day, it is an iPad that you check in on. Unlike in the past, when the poll book was a physical paper book that had to be printed, an electronic poll book can be updated instantaneously. So if a voter tries to vote twice or has already cast a mail ballot, the electronic poll book will know. Rhode Island has invested literally millions of dollars in recent years in the infrastructure behind our voter registration list and the technology. So we would be prepared for same-day registration. Signature verification is what Rhode Island uses to verify identity for mail ballots. So the Board of Elections examines the signature on file in the voter registration file and compares it to the signature on the mail ballot envelope. They have purchased equipment that can do this automatically. This legislation would allow them to do it, but it would require that equipment be audited to make sure that it wasn't unnecessarily rejecting or accepting signatures of valid voters. Signature verification is what is used in the vast majority of states. Witness notary requirements exist in only a very small number of states. In fact, the only state in 2020, other than Rhode Island, that was going to require it before the lawsuit was Alabama. So signature notary requirements have historically been a tool of voter suppression that have no proven efficacy at preventing fraud. There are challenges with signature verification. We know that younger voters and voters of color are more likely to have their signatures rejected. There's academic research, particularly out of Florida, that can be mitigated quite a bit through education and the design of the forms. So this bill, the big bill, would require that the forms be redesigned. As I mentioned about the going to a single envelope, and there are experts who can help design the form in a way that reduces the errors voters make. The bill also codifies something called the mail ballot cure process. Starting in 2017, Rhode Island contacted voters whose signatures were rejected and allowed them to sign an affidavit. And that affidavit would then cure their ballot and allow it to be counted. This would put that into law so it couldn't be taken away. And it would specify that the State Board of Elections would have to contact them by letter and, if possible, by phone. So it has a number of provisions to safeguard there. The constitutional amendment would go on the ballot at the next general election, which is 2022. The ballot harvesting, so it's a pejorative term for folks who are trying to help people cast their ballot. I think there would be less need for campaigns to send workers out, as they've historically done, to collect ballots if voters don't have these extra options. So for instance, if a voter can be on a permanent mail ballot list, there would be no need for a campaign to send campaign workers out to deliver applications and then follow up with the ballot. The ballot would arrive for the voter. The voter wouldn't have to interact with the campaign, and they could safely return their ballot. I will point out that the one example people might be aware of, in 2018, there was an election in North Carolina that was not certified because of allegations of fraud. That was the person at the center of that was a notary public. The campaign actually used the requirement in North Carolina that the ballot be notarized to take advantage of voters. And then your other question, is there a need for any federal action to expand voter access? Or is this mostly about state officials? There is a bill before Congress, HR 1, that would really do a lot of the things that are happening, we're proposing here. Other states are regressing on voting rights, not progressing. We're trying to make progress here in Rhode Island through these bills. Kate Bowden from Disability Rights Rhode Island. Kate asked about online application for mail ballots. How would that work? That would work the same way online voter registration works, which is through an online application process. It would actually use that same portal. So you would have to have a driver's license number or a state ID number to access that. We're here to advance voting rights. We believe that the last 4 elections have shown that Rhode Island elections can be held safe and secure without some of the things that we're trying to get rid of permanently. But we think the proof is in the hundreds of thousands of voters in Rhode Island who voted safely in the last 4 elections. I want to thank, again, all of our speakers for joining us today, for the voters, for sharing your experiences, to the sponsors for introducing and championing this legislation, Senator Oyer, Representative Kazarian. We're sorry that Senator DeMario's internet link went down, but want to thank her for her sponsorship as well. And to those supporters who are with us today, you can go to letrivote.org and it will have more information about how you can take action to make this a reality. So, thank you very much, everyone.